So I'm going to just yammer for a little bit about performance in ServiceNow, and that'll be fun for everyone, I'm sure. So I'm talking about it from a pro code perspective. So performance tip number one: don't use Flow Designer if you can avoid it at all. I'll talk a little bit about why that is, but I'm not going to be talking about how to make your flows perform well, because you can't. It doesn't work that way. And I'm just going to be talking from a pro code perspective to developers. Also, after this talk, at some point, I'm going to have a PDF handout available with the quick reference sheets, a single page, one-sided. So that'll be available to you if you want. I guess I should introduce myself. Hi, I'm Tim Woodruff, author of a bunch of things. SN Pro Tips. If you ever been to snprotips.com, I wrote that. You should all go subscribe to it and also buy all of my books. The ServiceNow Development Handbook is the latest one. The 4th edition just came out. It's 1,000 times as cool as the 3rd edition, which is garbage by comparison. If you have that one, you're a fool. I've bamboozled you. Go buy the 4th edition. It's great until I release the 5th edition, at which point it will become crap. So, performance. Flow Designer is not generally great when it comes to performance. Your best bet when it comes to Flow Designer is going to be to, well, I mean, not use it, right? But if you must, and often we must, especially for situations where you need to do something that is not super heavy on the system. You're not like running this flow every 10 seconds forever. It's not the backbone of a massive integration. Then Flow Designer is like a fine choice. It's not going to be super instance impacting. But if you do need to use a flow and it does need to fire off, and such as in response to like a REST API call or something like that, well, then you have to think about, how am I going to do this in a way that is minimally impactful to performance? And the way to do that is, again, don't. Use Flow as little as possible. The reason for that is that the underlying sort of architecture of a flow is that there's a whole bunch of complex context records in a really heavy database table in ServiceNow. And that context is updated as the flow runs, and it's has to be read for the next step or for any, every chunk of doing that is happening. So whenever you are, whenever a flow is stepping from one step to the other or evaluating an input or whatever, that's a query. If it's setting an output or setting the value of an input, that's not just a query, it's IO. You're actually updating records all the time. So it's necessarily more performance impacting than a script, which just runs sort of raw, as it were, in the application server. If you wrote the most efficient version of that functionality as a script versus the most efficient version of a flow, the script will always be a lot faster. So if you must use a flow, avoid using a flow. How do you do that? You do it by making as much of your functionality as you can for really, really sort of heavy things into a script action in the flow. And that script action can just call a script include that you can maintain without having to mess with your flow all the time, which is great because as of now, and also last I checked, flows don't have a version history. So if you want to mess around with a flow, or if someone else has messed around with a flow and you want to see what changed, no, you can't. My understanding is that they're working on that functionality, but it's been years and it's not here. So I'm not expecting the moon immediately. So keep your code packaged elsewhere, like in a script include, and call that code from a script action in your flow. So speaking of writing code, do that. Write code. Write good code. Here's how to do that. Follow along, and I'll tell you all of the things you need to know to write good code, or at least like 9 of the things. We'll see how many we get to. We're going to talk about query performance first. It's like the main thing you do in ServiceNow is query stuff, right? It's just like a MariaDB or a RaptorDB database with an application server with sub-millisecond latency that connects to that database, and then a bunch of sugar on top. That's all ServiceNow is the sugar. So the main thing that you do when you interact with ServiceNow is query stuff. Even if you don't think that's what you're doing, and I'll get to that in a moment, it usually probably is. That's also the biggest performance limiting factor in most folks' code is their queries. If your queries are bad, then your code is bad and you should feel bad. So how do we make our code not bad? How do we make our queries not bad? We do the following, starting with some of the most egregious and yet most common things that I see. If you have a nested query, then don't. You should probably not have that. What I mean by a nested query is where you query for some record from the database, right? Let's say you want to iterate over all of the currently open incidents for some reason. So you're querying the incident table and you're looping through. You've got your while gr incident.next, because you didn't name your variable gr because you are a sane person and you're not trying to anger me. You named your variable gr incident or something. So you say while gr incident.next, and then your code inside the loop is what happens for each of those incidents. Well, if one of the things that needs to happen for each of those incidents is, well, now I need to go and get the reference to the assignee and get their manager, right? Well, you may not realize it. This is what I was talking about before. You may not realize it off the top of your head or when you're looking at the code, but calling .getReference is exactly the same as just writing a whole entirely separate query inside of your while loop for your outer query. So if you call getReference and you get the reference to the assignee of every single incident, well, first of all, that's a lot of duplicate work because you're doing a query, but a lot of those queries are probably for the same dude or dudette. So don't do that. Don't repeat queries. That's just silly pants McGillicuddy. Don't be that guy. Instead, take your outer query, do the whole loop, and each iteration of the loop have maybe an array. Maybe it's an array of sysids, some indexed field, sysid or user underscore name, an array of unique identifiers for all of the users whose managers you need to get. Every loop, check if the current user already exists in the array. And matter of fact, maybe just do not glide record, but instead do glide aggregate and get unique ones only. That's an option. But for each of those, you get all of the people, all of the assignees, all the unique assignees of any open incidents right now, because remember, that's the outer query. That's what we're doing. And then that's one query you've done. If you get 200 different folks in 1,000 different tickets, the original pattern, you would have done 1,001 query operations, whole separate queries, application server, talking to database server, getting a response back, that whole query, and table seek and whatever, preferably by an indexed field. 1,001, one for your outer query, and then one additional for every single iteration of your loop. Don't do that, silly pants McGillicuddy. Instead, do the other thing that I said, which is where you build a list of stuff that you have to query, and then you have a second query. That's 2, as opposed to 1,001. It's 2. And 2 is better than 1001. Sometimes less is better. I hate when people say less is more, because it's not. It's less. But less is better. Do that. Build a list, one additional query. Okay? So avoid nested queries if at all you can. Speaking of nested queries, this is not exactly a nested query, but it's so common. A lot of people don't realize if you have an encoded query, and that encoded query contains the little caret, the little up arrow, caret NQ, that's short for new query, I think. It actually does a whole separate, entirely unique query. So if you take that encoded query, say you're querying the incident table, and you build in your filter builder, you build a query that says incident state is active and state is resolved, or incident state, and it's like a top level and incident state is active and state is something else. So that's, if you hit that or button at the top of the filter list, you're doing a whole separate query. You're doing caret NQ, that's new query. That's no good. Don't do that. Silly pants McGillicuddy behavior. If you see NQ in your encoded query, you've doubled your performance impact. Avoid that if at all you can. It's sometimes easier when you're building in the filter builder to construct your queries in this way by hitting that top level or button that's above the filter builder. But if you can avoid it, avoid it. Think really hard about the logic you use. I know that a lot of us, and quite rightfully, we actually go to the list and we use the filter builder to construct our queries. And then once we've got the filter built appropriately and we run the filter, we do the query, we look at the list, we go, yeah, that looks right. We validate. That's good. That's wise. Continue doing that, please. But if you copy that query and use it exactly as it is, which you probably should do because you know for sure that that query matches at least those records that you can see, you have to make sure that you're building that query effectively and appropriately. Here's tip number 3. Tip number 3 is that rule, and pretty much every other rule about performance when it comes to filtering and querying, consider applying it also to any application navigator modules that link to any heavy tables, like a task-derived table, like incident, which is the perpetual example for everything I'm going to talk about, or the user table, or the audit table. These are called default queries, but all that means is that if you look at the app nav module thing, the module record that defines the stuff in your left nav, I guess it's not the left anymore, but when you click the all menu, that's your application navigator. All the things you can click in there, those are app nav modules. If one of them links directly to a table with no filter on it by default, that means that just to get to that table, you got to load the in most cases the count of the entire table. And as many of you will know, calling a method like getRowCount is really heavy. And whenever you get that count at the bottom of a list, you're getting the row count. That's very heavy. Avoid that. In order to avoid having to count every record in the entire table, and in order to avoid having to load every record in the entire table, or at least some subset of them, pre-filter those things. You go to the open incidents filter. It's got a state filter on there. Maybe you need to do that to users. How many people really need to go to the users list and see literally every user in the entire table? Probably not many. Probably a lot of those AppNav modules could have the query parameter, like query parameters like sysparm underscore query equals, and then your encoded query. You can also add sysparm filter only equals true. Sysparm underscore filter underscore only equals true. And that'll just load the filter of the list. So you don't have to load any records at all. There's no count, there's no records. It literally just loads the page, the frame, with the filter. So you can add your own filter. For administrative records, like the audit table or anything like that, for logs, that's really helpful. Do that. And you know what? Do that, and then maybe go to like create a bookmark for yourself for it, so that you don't have to remember that query parameter every time. Also, on the same topic of query performance, and by the way, I think I'm technically past my time. Started a little bit late. I'm just going to keep yammering until someone stops me, I think, or at least for a few more minutes. We'll see how that goes. Somebody stop me if I should stop. Speaking also about query performance, we talked about NQ in encoded queries. Every NQ statement in your query or operator in your query effectively doubles your query, assuming they're equivalent performance-wise. We talked about that. Also, same vein, avoid dot walking in filter query conditions, if at all possible. And sometimes it's not. If it's not possible to avoid dot walking in a query condition or a filter, especially a default filter, if it's not possible to avoid that entirely, then at least add it to your default filter as something that can be removed, or don't add it to your default filter for like the all module, right? Like if you go to logs, there's the all logs, there's also the error logs and the info logs. You filter them down. Avoid it if you can in all the scenarios that you can. The reason for that is that it actually does a join. Dot walking is not like a native concept. It's a thing that has to be constructed. If I want to filter record A on the data that is in record B that record A just happens to reference, I've got to actually load record B, right? Which means I've got to take these two disparate tables and join them. That's a SQL operation. You join two tables on that field that you're dot walking. If you dot walk multiple layers or you dot walk on multiple fields, you could potentially be joining several tables to your one query on one table, effectively doubling, tripling, quadrupling the performance impact, especially depending on how heavy those other tables are. I see someone in the chat says parent.parent.parent.sysid. I have seen that. I've seen where someone, I think it was in a report or something, had a query, a query that said either, I don't remember the exact field, but say it's parent dot short description or whatever is this, or parent short description is this, or parent, and then they just documented that like it only works up to 3 layers unless you add more. Terrible idea. Don't do that. Dot walking requires a join. A join is a whole separate extra query for every query. So keep that in mind. Not always avoidable, but if it is, avoid it. I'm skipping over a couple of things that will be in the handout that I will eventually have finished being written. The starts with operator. Here's another one. The starts with is a different tip. I forget what number we're on. Starts with operator has significantly better performance than the contains query operator, right? So if you're looking for, I don't know, someone whose name, like you're querying the user table and you're querying by name, the name field, you have the option to query by like name starts with Tim, right? Because you don't know if it's Tim or it's Timothy, let's say. That's my name. But either way, it starts with Tim. You would not do asterisk Tim, that contains Tim as your query. You would do starts with Tim. The performance of that is significantly better because you don't have to evaluate. You can exclude every record where the first character is not T, and every record where the second character is not I, and every record where the third character is not M. All those are excluded. Now you only have to do the evaluation of the rest of your query on the others, the ones that all start with Tim. If you don't do that, if you do contains instead, you'll get the same well, at least you'll get the same records back and maybe more. But every single record, you're not just able to rule it out by the first character, second character, third character. You have to rule it out by looking at the entirety of the string. And imagine you're writing the contains function in code. You can imagine how many more total operations you have to do, the computer has to do, in order for that code to run. Takes a lot more time. I don't know how many times more impactful it is. I assume that's a function of the number of characters in the field, but you get the idea. It's a lot more impactful from a performance perspective. People who use contains when they could use starts with are silly pants McGillicuddies. Next one, next tip. I'm not good at numbers. Counting. I see this all the time. We're back on the flow of don't do things you don't need to do in the order of how egregious and common they are at the same time. See this all the time. Don't use get row count unless you need to know the row count and you aren't going to iterate through them anyway. Okay, maybe you need to know the row count, but do you need to know it at the beginning? Probably not, right? And by the way, if your answer is yes, because I only have to know whether or not I've got a record at all, then you should be using set limit 1, and you should be using if dot has next, right? Like if gr incident dot has next. That's how you tell if there is one at all. And you must use set limit 1 if you only need one record, or I will fight you. Using get row count is performance impact. It's a big deal. It has a lot of impact on performance, especially for kind of mid to larger queries. There's a lot of performance impact. If all you need is the count, use glide aggregate. That's different. But in glide record, get row count is very impactful by comparison. And I'm almost out of time here, so I'm gonna go real fast. Instead of using get row count, if you're going to iterate through them anyway, just count the number of loops you're going through. Get row count actually does a whole separate query. Again, this is the pattern. Things that trigger separate queries that you probably didn't realize triggered separate queries. Yeah, getting row count requires a separate query. I don't know why, but it does. So don't use it unless you need it at the beginning. If you need it at the end, go through your whole loop and just increment a counter. And then however many that counter is at the end, that's how many records you got. I think I'm going to do like one more, and then I'm going to be out of time. Oh, here's a real fast one. Don't freaking log if you don't have to. Why would you just don't ever log? If you have gs.log or gs.info in your code, why have you done that? Use gs.debug. That will log in subprod, but it will not log in prod. I can't think of a reason to ever use gs.log. Can't figure it out. I don't know why everybody uses them all the time. Don't do that. Use gs.debug. Every log, whether it's a error, a warning, a log, an info message, every log message is a record inserted into a very heavy table, the log table. There's no need. There is no need. Don't do this. Errors and warnings, yes. Log errors and warnings. Do not catch an error just to log it. The system will log it. Let it throw. Let it throw the error. The system will include a bunch of context and details about the error if you just let it throw. If you can meaningfully handle an error, or if you can include some important context in an error message, do that. But don't catch an error just to log it because you lose context. That's my big pet peeve. And I think I'm out of time, and I believe we're about to do the closing remarks. So I'm now going to shut up. Thank you, everybody, for letting me rant. This was cathartic for me.